In this video, we focus on IUPAC nomenclature of esters. Remember that esters are molecules that have a carbonyl group, where the carbonyl group is directly bonded to an R group, which R is generally a carbon atom here, technically could also be a hydrogen. And additionally, that carbonyl carbon is directly bonded to another oxygen, and that oxygen is connected to an R group here, where this R group absolutely has to be a carbon atom. And so therefore, what you have as the general theme in an ester molecule is you will have a carbonyl group directly bonded to an O-alkyl group, as I am circling here as an essential component of that ester molecule. In this video, we are going to focus on how we go about naming esters, because esters are very common types of functional groups. They often are components of flavors and fragrances. So a variety of esters have very fruity or sweet smells about them, making them common ingredients that are added to perfumes and added as food ingredients. So let's take a look at the IUPAC nomenclature system for esters. So we're going to look at IUPAC names of esters. And remember that esters are another one of our so-called carboxylic acid derivatives, because we could break the O-alkyl bond of the ester molecule and replace that with an OH group to give a carboxylic acid product. In the case of naming esters, I'm going to draw an ester template here and break down how we would go about naming the different portions of this molecule. So I'm going to call this R prime over here, to differentiate between the R group over here and the R group here. And what we will do in naming these is we refer to the alkyl group here, the R group that's directly bonded to our oxygen over here, as an alkyl group. So you would name that alkyl group within the name of an ester. And then the other part of the molecule, that is our carbonyl directly bonded to the oxygen, we name as an alkanoate. So take whatever the alkane name would be that would correspond to the carbonyl plus however many other carbons were over here and branches and things, and name that and tag the term O8 onto it, so an alkanoate. And plugging those two terms together, the way that we do this is the first part of the name of an ester is the alkyl name. So we name it as an alkyl, where the alkyl part of the name refers to this R group here that's directly bonded to the oxygen. An alkanoate refers to the carbonyl group and that longest carbon chain, and the OH part of that name is going to indicate just that we have a carbonyl directly bonded to an oxygen atom there. So alkyl, alkanoates. Now for some of you, this term alkanoate may sound familiar to you because we have seen that alkanoate term before. The place we saw that alkanoate term before was when we named carboxylic acid salts. When we named carboxylic acid salts, we named those as metal alkanoates. So for example, in the case of just this generic example structure that I have shown here, this was referred to as a carboxylic acid salt because we have an oxygen anion directly bonded to a sodium cation there, and we referred to those molecules as, or this particular molecule was named as sodium, indicating the cation, and then alkanoate referred to the carbon chain here that included the carbonyl. So that included the carbonyl, oxygen, and then whatever the chain was here. In this case, the chain has 4 carbon atoms, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we referred to that as a butanoate. So this was sodium butanoate because it was a 4 carbon chain here with the OO at the end. So that O8 generically is going to be referring to having the carbonyl group, the oxygen, and the alkyl group that's bonded to. And then at the prefix of the name, that was where we indicated sodium to tell us that there was a sodium bonded to that butanoate group. So analogously, up here, when we're naming esters, rather than there being a metal complexed with the oxygen atom, instead you have an alkyl group complexed with the oxygen. Therefore, rather than being a metal alkanoate, instead it becomes an alkyl alkanoate. And so that alkanoate terminology, the way that we name this group that has our carbons, our carbonyl, and our oxygen as an alkanoate is going to be the same for naming an ester as it was for naming a carboxylic acid salt. The differentiation is that the first part of the name for an ester is going to be the alkyl group name that's bonded over here to our oxygen atom, versus in the carboxylic acid salt, that first part of the name was the metal, such as sodium. So let's take a look at a specific example or two of naming these esters as so-called alkyl alkanoates, plugging in some specific information here. So in this example, what I'm going to do is draw out an ester molecule, and we're going to determine the IUPAC name of that particular ester. So the one that we're going to start with is a very common ester, perhaps the most common ester. This is a common solvent that is used for extracting organic molecules from reaction mixtures. Or in the case of the research that my group does at UNF with students like yourself, what we do is look at marine bacteria and what sorts of unique drug-like molecules those bacteria from the sea produce. And we extract those molecules from the marine bacteria by using organic solvents, such as this molecule that we have drawn here on the screen, which we're going to name here. So in naming this molecule, we need to name the part over here that's directly bonded to the oxygen as an alkyl group of some sort. In this case, it's just a 2-carbon chain, so we'd refer to it as an ethyl group. We then name the other portion of the molecule over here. That is our 2 oxygen atoms and the chain that goes along with that carbonyl group. So there's 2 carbons in total in that chain, including the carbonyl. Don't forget the carbonyl in your count. So 2 carbons in the chain as an alkanoate would be ethanoate. So one way to name this, plugging those 2 terms together and following our template of these being alkyl alkanoates, is we could name it as ethyl ethanoate. But that term is not one that I'm super familiar with, to be honest, because the more common way of referring to an ethanoate group is to refer to it as an acetate group. Remembering that acetic acid was a 2-carbon compound that had the COOH there as one of the 2 carbons, when we remove a proton from acetic acid, we refer to that as acetate. So keeping in mind that the ethanoate is synonymous with acetate. And so ethyl ethanoate is the same as saying ethyl acetate. And in fact, if you're working in a research lab, the solvent bottle that you would see in the lab would most likely, in all cases I'm familiar with, say ethyl acetate is the big bold lettering on the bottle rather than ethyl ethanoate. But either of those 2 terms will work here. They are synonymous with one another, and they both fit the IUPAC rules for naming esters. Let's do one more example here. So let's take a look at this example problem where we are going to determine the IUPAC name for another ester. As I always advise, once we get this structure drawn out, I strongly encourage you to hit the pause button, work through this on your own, and then use the video as a way of checking your work and determining whether you are on track with this or not. So we'll go ahead and fill out the entire structure of this molecule, like so. And now we go ahead and we go about naming this. This one looks like quite a beast relative to the other example that we did so far, but the process is the same. Keep in mind that we take whatever was bonded to our oxygen atom, that's the oxygen right here, and we name all of that that's bonded there as an alkyl group, as the first part of the alkyl alkanoate template that we are following. So I'm just going to box this all off to remind us that we need to name that as an alkyl group as the first part of the name. So let's go ahead and work on naming that. To number that branch, that alkyl group that's going to form the first part of the name, we find the longest carbon chain, and we have to start that longest carbon chain right here at the carbon that was bonded to the oxygen atom of the ester group. So this is 1, 2, 3, following our longest carbon chain through here. Anything coming off of that is going to be referred to as a branch coming off of that chain. So we have 2 chlorine atoms here and here, and we have a methyl group coming off here. And so therefore, the parent name for this alkyl group is going to be propyl, because there's 3 carbons in that longest carbon chain of this alkyl group, 1, 2, 3. That is all of the atoms that I have highlighted in blue here, 1, 2, 3. And then our branches coming off of that are the 2 chlorine branches at position 1, that's right here, and the methyl branch at position 2. And so going ahead and filling this in, it's going to be in alphabetical order, since chloro comes before methyl, 1, 1, dichloro, and then 2, methyl propyl. And the word methyl and propyl run right together because there's no numbers separating them or anything. So it's just one word there, methyl propyl. And that's going to refer to the entirety of this alkyl group is referred to as a 1, 1, dichloro, 2, methyl propyl group. Keeping in mind the numbering of this branch, this alkyl group always has to start with number 1 being the carbon that's directly bonded to the oxygen, and then you find your longest carbon chain starting from there. So this is going to form the first part of our name, where we're following our template of naming these as so-called alkyl alkanoates as the template for naming ester molecules. So this part of the name is our alkyl part. Plug that into the template. So I will actually go ahead and plug that into the template right here. So our alkyl alkanoate name specifically is going to be 1, 1, dichloro, 2, methyl propyl. Boom. And then we leave a space, and then we will write our alkanoate name. And keep in mind that the alkanoate portion of the molecule is the portion that we are going to find over here to the left. It includes the oxygen atom there, as well as the carbonyl, and the alkyl group that's associated with that. So this is what we refer to as our so-called alkanoate group. To determine the name of that alkanoate group, what we will do is we will find the longest carbon chain starting from the carbonyl group. So carbonyl group is always carbon number 1 of this longest carbon chain. Going down the chain, we go 2, 3, 4, and 5, finding that longest carbon chain. So therefore, the parent name of this molecule, plugging in that to that alkanoate template, a 5-carbon alkanoate is going to be pentanoate. So I'm going to plug in the term pentanoate here. Just scratching out my work of how I'm doing this. Pentanoate is our 5-carbon chain. So that includes all 5 of the carbons here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that I've highlighted in that dark green color, as well as the carbonyl and the oxygen that I've highlighted as well. We know those are there because of that O8 suffix in the name, pentanoate. And then that leaves us one group unaccounted for, which is our methyl group here at position 4 of our alkanoate. And so we would refer to this as 4-methyl pentanoate. And we know that that methyl group has to be over here because the numbering is always such that the carbonyl of the ester is number 1 of this alkanoate chain, 2, 3, 4. So 4 is where our methyl group is. And so now we plug this, our specific alkanoate name, in as the last part of the name for our specific ester. So we already filled in the first part. The alkyl part was what we had boxed off in blue over here, and we plugged that in. The alkanoate part is the latter part of the name. So we're going to go ahead and plug that in. And that latter part, the alkanoate part of the name, is 4-methyl pentanoate. And the space here that I'm highlighting in yellow here between the first part of the name and the last part of the name down here allows us to distinguish between what is the branch, the alkyl group that comes off of the oxygen that we've boxed off in blue here, versus what is the parent alkanoate. And the parent alkanoate is that longest carbon chain and any branches coming off of it on the carbonyl side of the molecule. So it kind of broke the ester into two parts or pieces here, where the alkyl part or piece is the part that's directly bonded to the oxygen. We name that as its own entity, as a branch you could think of it as. And then the parent is the carbonyl group onward here to whatever carbon chain and other groups are associated with that we name as the second part of the name or the parent name of this molecule, in other words. So based on this information, you should now be prepared. If you run into any molecule where there is an ester functional group, you should be ready to go about determining the IUPAC name for that particular molecule.